is our neighbor in Arden. He lives on Harvey Road in the old original farmhouse for the original farm right next to the Guild Hall. And he lives there with the daughter of the Sharons, formerly Michelle Sharon. She's here someplace. And they have a accessible home there where you can go over and beard Scott in person if you need to. But so where this comes from, I just want to tell you a little bit of a story. So the Scholars Guild committee, programming committee met, and we heard about Scott, that he's been giving talks quite a few different places on themes of the Judeo-Christian heritage and its interaction with personality and mental health. And so I, along with Danny Schweers, were assigned to meet with Scott and make sure it wasn't a religious talk or a proselytizing talk, but something that could be appropriately a scholar's talk. And so we met, we had a fascinating time talking with Scott. It was partially a personal journey that he shared with us of his own trajectory in discovering these things and the impact it had on his own life, and his finding that maybe a universal human need for purpose and meaning, in part historically and through tradition, has been met with things like the Judeo-Christian traditions that bring stories of creation and origins and trajectory. And so that was a really interesting story. And the other part of it was about Kabbalah, which I'd always thought was a new thing, a mystical new age kind of thing, but actually is very ancient and had been hidden within Judaism, but has kind of come out into public life in the modern world, and that it has buried within it all kinds of stories of trajectory, of process, of things moving in time towards particular ends. I personally found that really fascinating. And so I don't know how much of all that Scott's going to share with us, but it's quite a remarkable bunch of stories he's got here. And I think we'll have fun hearing them out. So Scott, without further ado, go for it.
Thank you. Let me just share, get situated here. 1 second. Okay, we good? You can see the slides? Great. So thank you all for coming. We got a good crowd here. This is great. So I hear that religion is a first at the Scholars Guild. Excuse me, Freudian slip. Religion as a topic is a first at the Scholars Guild. And there's never been a presentation on religion. So hopefully I will do justice to that. We started this journey of a presentation in September of 2019. That's when I presented and had all these meetings and so forth. And then the 2020 hit the fan, as they say, and it got postponed. So here we are in 2021. It's a new year. We're just going to cross off last year off the list and we move on. So let's get started. Brene Brown says I should express my vulnerability. So I have some trepidations about this talk. First and foremost, of course, is it's religion. So people don't seem to not have an opinion about religion. Either you love it or hate it. There doesn't seem to be an in-between. I think the only topic more polarizing I could possibly pick would be politics. And I wouldn't dare touch that given what's going on these days. Interestingly enough, in preparing for this talk, doing Google searches, searching on the psychological benefits of religion, 165 million citations, page citations on Google, 165 million if you search on the psychological benefits of religion. To put that into perspective, Black Lives Matter, 1.4 billion, Donald Trump, 1.5 billion, politics in general, 2.8 billion, COVID, 6 billion, but religion alone, 2.1 trillion entries on Google about religion. Utterly amazing. The only thing I found that was greater than that for you science people is science at 4 trillion. So when you boast about your 50 likes on Facebook, know that it's a couple of 100 million to get you noticeable in Google. So yes, religion as a topic, I will try to do justice to this. It is not, religion for me is one of utility and less so of morality in how I use religion. We have a lot to talk about. The intersection of religion, psychology, philosophy, and we have about 50 minutes and then we'll leave a half hour for Q&A. So it's a lot to get in. I can express only about a half dozen slides of just framing slides for dialogue, given the broadness of the subject. My third trepidation is, given that this is a scholars guild, are my credentials. I have no degree in religion, no degree in philosophy, nor psychology. My formal background is engineering, IT, finance, and business. What I do have to present in some degree of expertise is that for the last 40 years, I have been an avid consumer, I would say, of a broad range of modalities for treating mental health. So I'm a professional patient going back 40 years, starting with the proverbial self-medication, in the early 80s with pot, and then working in Florida with cocaine, eventually leading to freebase, which is essentially the same as crack. And that did not help my mind nor my body in the 80s. While on a work assignment in 1983, I had been a field engineer going into the overseas department, and my first assignment was St. Thomas as a 25-year-old, expenses paid, front view in the harbor, have a Jeep, and on the start of a long-term set of assignments in the Caribbean, I, at the end of that assignment, proceeded to have what was diagnosed as a psychotic break from reality. I was flown by ambulance jet to Cooper, Christmas Eve, 1983. They diagnosed me as bipolar type 1, pumped me full of lithium and thorazine and a bunch of other things, in and out for several months, ultimately trying to commit suicide. They really couldn't handle me at Cooper Medical Hospital. It's a short-term facility. It's not a locked ward. So they shipped me off to the Institute of the Pennsylvania Hospital at 49th and Market Street in West Philadelphia, since it's closed, and I was institutionalized in total for 1.5 years. And extensive psychotherapy, medication, a variety of medication, and ultimately was packaged, what I would like to say is packaged for standard American success. Go out, restart a career, get married, 2 kids, 2 cars, a house in the suburbs, a dog, and life would be fine. And this formula for hard work and everything will be fine. For me, ultimately, it did not get better. It got better initially, but it steadily seemed to get worse over time. It got harder. I didn't know back then about the happiness curve, the U-bend of life that we'll talk about, happiness relative to age and the midlife crisis. I didn't know about the other happiness curve. I didn't know that the harder you work, the more money you earn, you don't get happier. In fact, probably after about $60,000, it flattens out, and over 100,000, it actually starts to decline in most studies. And I was working harder and getting less happy. And eventually, after 23 years, they were tweaking my meds. I grew up with the pharmacology. I started out, if you're in that profession, with the MAO inhibitors, and then I went to tricyclites, and then to the SSRIs, and was on Prozac, and ultimately ended up on Wellbutrin and Xanax. And at the time, I didn't know about the good and the bad of psychology and pharmacology until later, much later, when I heard Martin Seligman the former president of the American Psychological Association, in his TED Talk, and it's a wonderful TED Talk if you haven't heard it, about what the profession has done good, not good, needs to do better. And what the profession had done very good at was handling people like me. They were very good at diagnosing, very good at managing pathology. What the profession hadn't learned at that point, I was mainly dealt with through pharmacology, was how to thrive, how to find meaning, and so forth. It wasn't a focus. It became a focus, and he talks about this, and certainly with CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, getting into thought processes and practices, and then positive psychology coming along, and with its focus on thriving, it was a different world in psychology. So I, like half of America, got divorced and was looking for a change. I had, during that year, had been at a business workshop on innovation, and they talked a lot about cognitive biases and the stymie in business. I started to get into Daniel Kahneman and behavioral economics, and Dan Ariely. They both have wonderful talks also. If you're interested in the subject of biases and cognitive biases, Daniel Kahneman, Thinking Fast, Thinking Slow, authors at Google, is a wonderful talk. Dan Ariely, Predictably Irrational. That behavioral economics and the irrationality of us led me to Aaron Beck and David Burns, Feeling Good, and CBT, and then on to Martin Seligman and positive psychology. And so I was finding these courses and books everywhere I could, and I was very curious about that and was learning a lot. Tal Ben-Shahar's course on positive psychology, freshman course at Harvard. He put the entire every lecture of his last year on YouTube, so I was able to watch the entire semester of that course, which ultimately became the highest rated course at Harvard of all time, given that they have such a problem with depression, many orders of magnitude more than the rest of the country there. Eventually, I wasn't looking for religion, and religion sort of found me. I went down to New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina in Christmas of 2006 to rebuild homes, get away. And in the process of doing that, came across a woman who insisted on having us over to thank us for helping in her community. And she started to destroy my stereotypes of what makes a person happy. She was an incredibly poor Black woman living in a FEMA trailer. Her neighborhood was ravaged, destroyed. Just from my perspective, nothing to be happy about. And here she was, so much happier than me. She was a woman of tremendous faith. I didn't know at the time that she was quoting to me the book of Job, that the Lord giveth and taketh away. And this is just what happens, and it's part of life. But she had tremendous faith. And after meeting her, it really it struck me. I actually went out back after meeting her and cried. I didn't understand why I have all the things that I have, and she's so much happier than I am. What's wrong with this picture? As life would have it, shortly thereafter, within a week, I met another woman online who happened to be a Hasidic woman. It's the more spiritual side of Judaism. It's a mixture of Kabbalah and Orthodoxy. She happened to be from Greece, and she started to introduce me to Kabbalah. I started to learn about that and the mystical side of Judaism, and I had left the religion for the most part, even though I had grown up with it as a small child. And I had my kids and our family had gone to what would be in Judaism, a Reformed synagogue, but a lighter, more humanistic, not so much into spirituality. And all of a sudden, I started to learn more about this. I started to meet people, rabbis that were involved in Hasidic teaching. I went to Israel several times for Kabbalah conventions. A business mentor came back into my life who I had known for 20 years, my first customer in a consulting practice. Met him on just for a different topic and mentioned the subject, and all of a sudden he became the Yoda of comparative religions. Who knew? He never once mentioned it in the 15, 20 years before I knew him. I guess it was an example of when the student is ready, the teacher appears. I started to share my experience at synagogues and churches and community centers. I took courses after courses, probably 40 or 50 of those in that time. And over the last 10 years, it's probably 150 talks like this that I have shared my experience of this. So I suppose what I am a professional at is sharing my experience of psychology as a consumer, philosophy as a consumer, and religion as a consumer. There are probably people on here that have more advanced degrees and so forth, and I will try to do justice in my scholarship of what I present. So the agenda, we did trepidations and backgrounds. How are we doing on time here? Let me just see.
It's 5 of 8.
5 of 8, okay. We got to go quick. So,
Rescued by.
What's that? We'll have to move quick. So are there psychological benefits? Is it just hearsay? Guide to engagement. How do we make this accessible? The relationship between beliefs, behaviors, and emotions. The U-bend of life, we will look how that maps very nicely to Judeo-Christian philosophy. Components of religious spirituality and its relationship to mind. I don't think we'll get to religious practice examples because we're going to run out of time. So psychological benefits. Are there? As I said, if you do a search, 165 million responses will come up, and it is all over the place from very reputable organizations. This is the National Alliance of Mental Illness, NAMI. Religion gives people something to believe in, provides a sense of structure, typically offers a group of people to connect with other beliefs. These facets can have a large impact on mental health and so forth. I'm just going to give you some headlines. They actually do a very nice job of organizing the benefits of religion, and they break out religion versus spirituality. Religion having the community, the ritual, the teaching side, and the spirituality, you see there, the individuality, mindfulness, a sense of belonging. We won't go into those, but just to know that they're there if you have that interest. American Psychological Association. What role do religion and spirituality play in mental health? That bullet that you can't really see everything, they're talking about longevity of life. Actively religious people, on average, live 7 years longer than the average, than the normal. In African Americans, 14 years. Not a mental health issue, but certainly a life issue. National Institute of Health. Public and private religious practice can help maintain mental health, prevent mental diseases, and they go on and on in their documents that they have. Psychology Today, a lot to say on the link of religion and mental health. A survey, I forget the group, I don't have the name in front of me at the moment, that it's an important thing if you're a therapist, because 50 to 75% of religious people would like their therapist to be able to talk and integrate the religious modality with the psychotherapeutic modalities. And there's a strong interest in that. One of the other people I met in the hospital back in 1983 at Cooper Medical Hospital was a born-again Christian, a resident psychiatrist. And at that time, she was the only person that would talk to me about my psychotic episode, which had a lot of religious delusions and things, visiting God, a very bizarre experience. But she was the only one that would talk about it because she said there was no place in psychiatry, certainly at that time, with integrate religion into that. They had no place for it. She wasn't even allowed to talk about it, even though she did. I actually looked her up 7, 8 years ago, and she has a flourishing practice in North Carolina, integrating religion and her psychiatry, and has done very well in that regard. Pew Research has done numerous studies. There has been so much scholarship in the last 20 years. It is utterly amazing on the relationship of religion and psychology and mental health. Pew has done numerous studies on this. If you're familiar with Pew, they do a lot of studies on sociology and culture. Wonderful organization, Pew Charitable Trust. You don't have to, I'll just give you what this chart is that you're looking at there. It's a self-identified people who say they are very happy. And the red are actively religious. The gray in the middle is inactive religious, but affiliated, but inactive, and then the unaffiliated. And in almost every country, those that are actively religious have a higher happiness, report higher happiness. Interestingly enough, you can see at the top there, Mexico, Colombia, Ecuador, economically much poorer, and Mexico is probably 1/3 of our per capita income. And you see US is way down. This isn't the whole chart, I couldn't put it all on there. But it seems to be the wealthier the countries are, the less happy they report that they are, for whatever that's worth. The Handbook of Psychology and Religion, Psychology of Religion and Spirituality. If you're interested in this subject, this is the 2nd edition. It came out in about 2013. The 1st edition came out in 2005. It had about 8 chapters. The 2nd edition had 32 chapters. There is another edition that came out in 2019. It now has 2 volumes, and it was taken over. The publishing of it was taken over by the American Psychological Association. It has now become mainstream as a part of the body of knowledge for professionals. It will set you back, though, about $400. This used version is only $40 if you have the interest. It has pretty much everything you would like to know about the relationship of psychology and religion and meaning systems and so forth. So with regard to the question, I think the story has been told, it's been studied, it's been demonstrated. There is empirical evidence of the efficacy and there's and relevant scholarship on the efficacy of the benefits of religion to mental health. It has been certainly clearly demonstrated over the last 20, 30 years. So a guide to engagement, to the degree that you are predisposed to want to listen to something like this or not. The one thing I have learned from cognitive biases from the Daniel Kahnemans of the world is that our cognitive biases have a tremendous impact on the filtering of information that we receive. These are certainly optical illusions. You can look them up if you haven't seen them, but the A and the B here in the colored squares are the same color. I have yet to see anyone that can see them as the same color, but if you were to block out all the other squares and this, they would appear as the same color to you. Knowing it doesn't help. On the right is Shepard's table by the neurologist Shepard that wanted to demonstrate optical illusion. And those tables are the same dimensions if you turn the one on the left to the one on the right, even though the one on the right looks square. I have yet to see anyone that sees them as both rectangular. I can absolutely guarantee you if we were in the guild hall, I would have the printout and we could put that on there. And all I'm saying is your mind plays tricks on you and me all the time. And so we have to be challenged. We should challenge ourselves in what we hear. And it probably doesn't help America either between the left and the right. Jonathan Haidt, a great moral psychologist, does wonderful talks on the challenges between left and right and cognitive biases. So a guide to engagement. I'm not here to prove or disprove God. I will tell you right now, I have listened to Christopher Hitchens and Sam Harris and Richard Dawkins and the God Delusion and Bertrand Russell and his teapot and all the theologians that want to discuss the proof of God. And I can't make head or tails of whether God exists or doesn't exist. I am technically an agnostic. I am technically an agnostic. For pragmatic purposes, though, I choose theism. I choose theism for practical purposes, for what it does for me, for meaning, joy, happiness, relationship, all the things in life, and what it does for me. And what I've learned is it's okay that I'm technically agnostic. I can't prove or disprove. I'm going to choose the belief system that gives me the most efficacy in life. I am a utilitarian by nature. And if it provides me with greater utility value, I choose it. There's lots of religious story. To me, fundamentally, the belief in God comes down to one question. And one question only, for me. Do I believe that consciousness is a late stage evolutionary process that came out of energy and matter, which is what science expresses. That's what science knows today. Did consciousness come later? Or did consciousness precede the beginning of the universe? Did consciousness lead to the beginning of the universe? Fundamentally, if you believe that consciousness preceded the universe, then we call that God in various forms, one or the other. And if we believe that it arose later as a late stage evolutionary process in humanity, and this self-awareness, the Descartes, I think, therefore I am, kind of thinking that we have, then you're an atheist of sorts in that regard. I bring this up because one of the people that influenced me was the Nobel laureate George Wald. He won a Nobel Prize in the 1960s for identifying the process by which the eye perceives color. He was a biologist. But he also wrote a paper for Scientific American in 1954 when the raging debates going on between intelligent design and evolution. And he wrote The Origin of Life in Scientific American. And he's famous for a quote that came out there essentially saying something to the effect that given enough time, time is the hero of the story. Given enough time, we could have what we have on this earth and what we experience. And that was his position. He was an atheist, a staunch atheist in the 50s and 60s. Over time, things happened. The Wistar Institute started to look at the statistics and probabilities with biologists of evolution. And there was debate of, is there even enough time in the universe for this to happen or not? Jim tells me now that, Jim Schwaber, that they have figured that out. Ultimately, for George Wald, he couldn't get past two things. He couldn't get past what we have come to understand as spontaneous generation of life, that life started just about when the earth cooled enough to support life very rapidly, and then proceeded with its evolutionary process. And he couldn't come up with an answer for where consciousness comes from. We know how consciousness, and I'm not going to go any further because Jim will torture me into consciousness. We know, I'm sure Jim can tell us how it interacts with reality, how it interacts with physicality, where in the brain feelings and different things happen, and he could give us a beautiful talk on the interaction of consciousness with physicality. What we don't know is where consciousness comes from. Bob Dylan, talking about writing his songs in an interview, said that in his most prolific period and all these wonderful songs he came up with, his inspiration came to him like a fire hose into his brain. He doesn't know where it came from. George Wald, towards the end of his life, is very famous for his switch, at least within religious circles, for his switch from, he himself redacted what he wrote from The Origin of Life. And I will paraphrase quoting him, but there's a lot on him that you can read if you look up George Wald and Change in Religion. It offends my sensibilities as a scientist, but I have come to believe that the stuff of mind has been here all along. The stuff of mind, M-I-N-D. And so he couldn't reconcile it, and he ultimately became a theist. And then everything else we have, whether it's the Moses story in the Old Testament or the Jesus story or Hindus, or it's story. And we love story, and we attach ourselves to story. And whether there is historicity to those stories is immaterial to me. It's the mythology that I attach to and the story that I attach to. So again, that's right. Why that's important to me, the choice of belief. And you all have a belief, because I don't think anyone knows what reality is, the phenomenon of reality. So whether you're conscious of a belief or you actively choose a belief, you have a belief. Somewhere your foundation, your castle is built on something, and if you dig deep enough, it's a castle in the air. And the question is, what belief do you have, and what belief do you want to have? I choose a theistic belief. It gives me a greater joy, and for numerous reasons that we can talk to in the Q&A. Beliefs matter. CBT talks about it. You know, our thought processes affect our behaviors, our emotions. They affect us, they challenge, so beliefs do matter. We've proven that. We grew up, when I grew up, we didn't have this, you know, and our brains being trained with neuroplasticity, we didn't have that. That's something in the last 50 years that has come to fruition, this understanding of what is going on, and that we can rewire our brain. What gets fired together gets wired together. And we can create new neural highways in our brain. I can go from being a predisposed depressive to a conscious optimist. I can become a conscious optimist, and not just I can initially act optimistic, but ultimately I can become optimistic. I can become happy, and I can thrive, and I can have joy. I can rewire my brain. That's a remarkable thing. I take these as axiomatic. I've been through enough that I haven't seen anything to disprove any of these. So for me, what we're doing is an exploration into the utility value of spiritual belief, in training our brains to have a more rewarding life, more meaningful life, more meaningful relationships, being a better part, a better contributor to the world. The last thing, and I attribute this to my, I think he was on here, although I don't see him anymore, Ernie Zokes, this business mentor. We have been meeting now since we started this in 2007. We have been meeting almost every week for 2 to 3 hours, and we discuss philosophy, religion, psychology, and business. Dialogic inquiry versus dialectic, we all sort of know it's the Socratic method. I present a thesis, and you present an antithesis. We battle it back and forth, and we come up with a synthesis. And it's very good for hammering out common truths between us. It's not so good. It's not always so good when we're dealing with beliefs or new paradigms, where we don't have enough information, and the only way to get the information is to dive into the paradigm and act as if it is true, and see if it is true experientially, empirically. So a dialogic is a softer way. I present a thesis, you come with me into the thesis. You come with me into the experience, and you let the experience tell you whether your experience tell you whether it is true or not your prior experience. This changed me in business. I became a chief innovation officer because I now could think out of the box. I never knew what out of the box thinking was. It finally dawned on me to have out of the box thinking means it has to be crazy to me. If it's in my box, I already understand it. If I wanted out of the box thinking, it required a leap of faith. And faith became something I used, not just in religion, but in business, because it allowed me to go into new endeavors before I understood all the possibilities. So I leave these as just my accessibility guides to engagement. Oh, yawning already? Wow. It's not, we haven't even gotten to the yawning part. All right, so I drew this myself. Relationship, beliefs to emotions. So what we have come to understand is we have a belief system, a philosophy, a theology. Could be secular, doesn't matter. We all have a belief system. We have rituals and practices. And then we have emotions and reactions, and we're the kite. We can't control life, whether you want to call it God, nature, whatever. Life comes at us. It's just happening. And they say in sailing, we cannot set the way the wind blows, but we can set the sail. So we get to fly the kite. The problem is, so I grew up in a conservative Judaism. It had all the ritual and practice, but not much of the spirituality. So I wasn't grounded in anything. It was a very weighty, very obligatory, a lot of observation and service. So the religion I had later in life, Reform, it didn't really have the rituals and practice. In Judaism, only 5–10% of Reformed Jews are actively engaged in spirituality on a regular basis. It's mainly humanistic and cultural in a lot of synagogues. So you need these things to work together. There needs to be a consistency between the belief systems we have. We need to bind it to our emotional mind. It must be bound. It doesn't just happen. It's like choosing to be healthy until we do whatever it is we have to do, whether it's eating or exercise, whatever. Michelle's going to laugh at me because I do it not enough of both of those. So I say that with a certain degree of hypocrisy and aspiration. But nonetheless, just to understand that there is a relationship between these. The U-bend of life. This came out from the Economist magazine. It was the first time I came across it. And I believe this was the 2010. It was the cover of Economist magazine. And it was the proceedings, the National Association of Science, I believe is PNAS, stands for. I didn't know there was a U-bend to life. I heard of midlife crisis, but I didn't know that happiness decreased with age, and then we get happier as we go through the second half of life. I would fight with the millennials at work. We had the millennial boomer wars, and I would tell them, you know what, no matter what you say, every year I get a little bit happier and you get a little bit sadder. And that's how I would leave it. But this is the happiness curve. Well, and the midlife crisis occurs somewhere in that age. And this is across cultures, countries, economics. It does not matter where you're at in life. This seems to be universal. Not everyone, obviously, but it is for most of us. We go through this happiness curve. Well, I'm learning about the Kabbalistic interpretation of the Old Testament. And there seems to be a similar pattern. And if we were to take this U-bend and put in our midlife crisis, which Carl Jung, I'll paraphrase, talks about thoroughly unprepared, we stroll into the afternoon of life. The tools of our youth are of little use, and by evening become a lie. Thoroughly unprepared, we stroll into the afternoon of life. The tools of our youth are of little use, and by evening become a lie. It is a paraphrasing of his description of what we go through psychologically. This is Judeo-Christian philosophy. It is that simple. There is creation, an act of creation. We are created. At some point, there is a revelation, and then there is a redemption. The Hebrew word for redemption, teshuva, actually means to return. We go back. We separate from this prime source, this whatever we want to call that prime source of consciousness. We separate, and this happens as a fractal. It happens at a people level. It happens at a humanity level, and it happens at an individual level. And the reason that the Bible is so timeless is that all of the dysfunction that you and I experience in our life is in all the characters there. Every single one of them is dysfunctional. The best they can possibly say about Noah, one of the more righteous, is that he was righteous in his time. But they all were dysfunctional people, and that's why we see ourselves in that. So by extension, I believe I'm certainly dysfunctional, and I'm going to assume that you all are equally dysfunctional and that you can see yourself as you go through life. So this is the basis of Judeo-Christian philosophy. And the 5 books of Moses map out to that. Genesis is basically the story of mankind separating from Eden, from God, and becoming more and more enslaved within creation, further and further away from this consciousness until they are completely, literally and emotionally enslaved, and that's going down into Egypt. That's the Egypt story. The Hebrew word Mitzrayim also means constrained. It's the same. And then literally, like any of us in life, we have to break free from this first half of life. We must break free from it. So it's a very challenging time when we go through the midlife, when whatever tools of our youth that aren't working, we have to literally go through plague after plague. The story at the mystical level is really about the human psyche that we have to go through. We receive a new revelation, and just like the Jews, even though they receive it, they can't handle it. They go right back to their old ways. It's hard to break free from that. It's so comforting to take the whatever we've learned in the first half of life, the tools of our youth, whatever they might be, whether they're genetic predispositions, cultural family, whatever it might be, that has gotten us to that point, geography, position, whatever. Eventually, we have to learn something new. That's the Leviticus. We learn the new ways of what it is we have to do. And then we wander in the desert because we're still lost, because we've just learned a new way of thinking in the second half of life, but eventually we work our way and we get to the promised land. And that is the U-bend of life. That is Judeo-Christian philosophy, and it maps very nicely empirically to what science would call the happiness curve. We can put in the more mystical side of that. The first half of life is fate. It's fated. We really don't have a choice. You know, our parents, again, genetics, whatever it is, we're not really acting with free will. We are acting by beliefs and other things that are driving us to do whatever it is we want to do until we reach that point when it doesn't work anymore for us. And it is at that point that we become free. We break free. We are now free from the slavery of what it is we had, and we can act with free will. We can, in essence, change our fate to now a destiny. Much like Luke in Star Wars, when the Father says, "It is your destiny," he was fated to have the Force. His destiny could be good or evil. That was his choice he had to make. That's when we can have free will. This is the only last thing that we would add that would complete the sort of mystical model of this philosophy is that the act of creation is a separation, it's a duality. This notion of God, at the mystical level, there is no God. There is just, it's called in Hebrew, Ein Sof, no thing. It's undefined. It's just, there's nothing. It's pure imagination, pure potential, nothing more than that. It's pure. At the moment, there is a will to do something. You might be familiar with the beginning of the Old Testament. In the beginning, God created the heaven and earth. It's not the mystical definition or the mystical translation in the Hebrew. It actually translates to, in the beginning was created God, heaven, and earth. The moment that this potential happened, the moment you have creation, you have creator. And now you have a symbiotic relationship between us. We are the side of God pretending not to be God. We are the side of eternity pretending to be finite. And these finites are chunked away in lives of 60 to 100 years, typically 70 to 100 years. And we live finite existence for a period of time, because what else would you do with eternity? There's an American philosopher, Alan Watts, who describes this nicely. If you look up on YouTube, To Dream a Life, he will do a very nice job. It's only about 5-6 minutes. He will talk about dreaming a life, about the godly consciousness and what it's like to dream a life. Wonderful little talk. That's Judeo-Christian philosophy with the mysticism thrown in, and the best I can do in a short period of time. This is a very complicated chart here, and we have time. We have 10 minutes. I can go through this in 10 minutes. I will explain this here, the relationship of the components of religious spirituality. Because I'm Jewish, I can speak more from the Judaic side, but it relates very nicely with Christianity, certainly. You know, there's levels of interpretation in Bible exegesis. There is the fourfold, I think it's called a fourfold, I forget. In Christianity, there is also formal levels of interpretation. So if we were to take that the reverse is true, that matter did not beget consciousness, then how does spiritual energy produce matter? So the Kabbalists laid all this out. The closest thing we have in science that could even begin to relate to this is dark energy and dark matter. We know in science there's something else out there in another dimension. It's probably 20 times as much as the mass that's in the universe. We can't get to it, it's in another dimension. We just know that it's acting upon the universe. Some of the things it tells us the universe is accelerating. We know there's forces acting upon it, but there's something else out there. So in Kabbalah, in the mystical Judaism, divine consciousness must create matter. At the instant of the Big Bang, there was no matter. It was just energy. I mean, it was just the chemical elements didn't exist. Even in the beginning, there were only a few chemical elements. They had to unfold. They unfolded very rapidly in instances of seconds, to get to where we have, but nonetheless. And so from a spiritual perspective, there is a divine mind. There's just a oneness to it. It's just potential. I want to create a world. I want to do something. The moment that thought comes in to create, there's an emanation that comes out. That emanation actually creates time and space and matter. And then it must be formed into all the things that we have. And eventually we get down into the world of action. That's how the Kabbalists define the divine mind. What I want to express to you is they also define levels of soul within your consciousness that map very nicely to what we might use in psychology. The id, the ego, the superego, we're all familiar with that model of Sigmund Freud. Sigmund Freud was an atheist. And I never read anything about him that told me what he did with regard to religion, but his father was a Hasidic Torah being the Old Testament scholar, and his grandfather was a Hasidic rabbi. And undoubtedly, the Kabbalistic traditions within Judaism would have been discussed with him, and he would have been well versed in that. And lo and behold, we have levels of soul from a spiritual perspective that have been mapped out in a secular way. What has come very much in the late stages now, within the last 20, 30 years, is this upper level of mindfulness. I call it third person reality. It's the first level of mysticism, to sort of step behind myself and think of myself as a person, and not think from the first person, but from the third person. That level of mind, we'll see, is talked about in the prayer service, in the level of mind in the religion. The services within Judaism map to those levels of mind. There's 3 services a day. The purpose of those services is to orient the id, the ego, and the superego, the levels of soul, the life force, the wind, which is the emotional level, and the intellect, neshama. It's to orient them so that we're acting consistently. And so in their wisdom, what they have found is it takes 3 times a day to get that orientation. Morning, in Judaism, the day starts in the evening, morning, afternoon. The Sabbath is a special day. There's nothing in Sabbath. There's nothing in nature to denote the Sabbath. Certainly, there's daily. It's the Earth's turn. There's the lunar, the month, and there's the solar, the annual. But there's nothing. The Sabbath is just it's a creation of time, and a creation of time to step out of character. The purpose of the Sabbath, I used to say, why would God care? We do have time. Oh, I got to work through it. Why would God care about whether I turn on a light switch or not, or drive, or do any of these things? What's the purpose of this Sabbath, of not doing any work? And it only came to me through the study that, it was the symbolism of that. It was a symbolism to make sure that I don't do it, that I stay out of character, that I step behind my character. And it's a day to evaluate how I am doing in life. Tremendous psychological benefit to step behind oneself, to step out of life, step out of role, do not do anything. Don't worry about whether it's Donald Trump or CNN or Fox or whatever. And we step out and we focus on my role in life. And it goes even better on an annual basis. Whether you're Jewish or not, you certainly know the Jewish holiday of Yom Kippur. We simulate death. It is a simulation of death. They add another service beyond that. Not only do I step out of character, I try to peek outside of time and space to simulate, because death is not death as we know it. Death is return. To die is to return into the, whatever you want to call this, eternal consciousness, to peek outside of time and space, to commune with the writer of my character and the writer of this world. To actually, if you ever have a dialogue with a writer who's writing a book, it's in essence to have a dialogue with his characters, and his characters helping him to decide how the book turns out. And so all the services are aligned to align our levels of consciousness. We have levels of interpretation from the simple. And people get caught up in religion. The simple is the Jews went down to Egypt, and over time the Pharaoh enslaved them. It's the simple. It's just the simple story. They call it the Peshat. There is a hint. The next level is a hint. There's a hint of morality. There's a hint of something that we should do within the story. Beyond that, there is this drash. It's a comparative. The story keeps happening. The Jew goes down into Egypt, gets enslaved by Pharaoh. Jonah goes on an assignment. He gets enslaved within a whale, and then he has to ultimately do his story. And there's story after story of this going down and coming out and redemption and finally doing what we need to do. And then you have the hidden, and the hidden is the magical side, because the hidden is where my agency and my free will happens. It's me learning who I am, what my purpose is in life, what is my contribution to the story of humankind. At the hidden. And beyond the hidden is, well, it's psychosis. It's outside of reality. It's beyond the rules, because beyond the rules, if we were designing a world and we haven't designed it yet, if we go outside of this universe, the rules of the universe don't matter. They could be anything we wanted them to be. And so to go to this prophetic side, you know, it's already, they call it the hidden. So there are the components that happen in mysticism. I'm banging through this here. Okay, religious practice. I won't go through all of them. How are we doing? I got 1 minute before I got to open up for Q&A. Good. Okay, I'm going to give you religious practice in a simple saying from the Talmud, which is the commentary on the Old Testament. And basically one of the sayings is the world stands upon three things. And it sort of maps to CBT in its own way. There is the study, and it's the learning of what we do. The prayer is the communion, and the acts of kindness. Some examples are there. In Judaism, you have the Old Testament called the Torah. That's the what. The Talmud is the why. It's like watching the directors. I'm first time watching Breaking Bad, and the directors would explain all the dysfunction of the characters and why they did such and such. Well, that's what the Talmud is. It's an explanation of the why of all the characters. And then ultimately the philosophers and the teachers give us the how. And with prayer, you have communal and individual. There are perspectives, the daily, the weekly, the annual. There's even beyond that, the Shemitah, which is a 7-year sabbatical. And you get that from academics. You take 7 years, and then there's the Jubilee, 50 years. So there's even a broader spectrum of perspective times to evaluate life. And then it is filled with affirmations and gratitude. I did not talk about, ultimately in 2010, I decided to get off of medication. I had learned enough. I needed someone to help me. Luckily, in my synagogue was a therapist with a spiritual background that I could help me with that. Dan Gottlieb of NPR fame, Voices in the Family. Dan is a paraplegic, and I felt the same level of shame when I met him as I met this woman in New Orleans for the first time. Here was this gentle man that had such an oomph for life. And it was one of those, you know, I was sad because I had no shoes until I met a man who had no feet. And in meeting him, and he taught me how to grasp life. And ultimately, it was a very simple technique. It was 100 blessings a day. It comes from King David. And I would count 100 blessings a day. And 100 blessings a day is a magical thing. I used to keep a little notepad on the side, and I would just check off 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. To get to 100, it takes two things. One is you get down to a very low level of gratitude. I'm talking loving my shower head and the rainwater that comes out, and that I have organic shampoo and I can choose mint one day and coconut the next day. And I had my Sabbath vanilla silk shampoo or a conditioner. You get down to very low things to be grateful for. The other thing is you break up negative thinking, because to get to 100 It's pretty much every 10 minutes you have to think of something to be grateful for. I used to, I'll finish it up with this, but I used to, for 25 years, I was on antidepressants. Every year or so, much to the chagrin of the psychiatrist, I would just go off cold turkey. I just wanted to feel who I was. And what I learned, you know, and ultimately the depression would descend upon me like a cloud, and I would feel it. It would feel lousy. But I wanted to feel who I was. And what I was able to do within about 3 months was to get off of antidepressants and rewire my brain. It got easier and easier. If I didn't do it regularly, now it just happens. I don't have to think about it. The gratitude just happens. I don't have a need. I don't mind going into that side of me because I feel like I'm attached to it. And because I know that every swing down, and bipolar, I got to tell you, at least for the level that I have, it's quite a blessing because it allows me to go to hypomania. And in hypomania, I get a tremendous creativity because it's below the detrimental side of mania. And so I don't mind the depression. I don't mind that feeling of who I am because that is the totality of what it is to be conscious, is to have this spectrum, such a wide spectrum of emotion that you and I can attach to. And I don't want to cut that off. I want to feel it. And I feel blessed that I have a broader cycle probably than most of the highs and the lows. And I take that as a blessing that I can do that. It allows me to attach much more to what life has to offer. All right. I'm a little bit over, so I will open it up for questions, Q&A, if you have any. Hopefully you have some.
Would you stop your sharing?
Oh,
so
yes,
we can
yes,
see
let
each
me
other?
do that. Yes.
Please.
Hey, Scott, can you address the discovery of meaning in that process?
You know, in its simplest term, and well, meaning is in a couple of levels. One is that, you know, we can create meaning. Let's say there is no God, there's no story, it's random, we're here, and it is what it is. So we create meaning. To me, there's a qualitative difference between finding a meaning and finding my meaning. My meaning, meaning that I'm part of a story, a grand story, a cosmic Shakespearean story for which I have an important role, as do you, in that story, in the grand story of humankind, of creation. And I have a role to play and to find that. And I can communicate with the creator of that story in some form or another for inspiration. From a feeling perspective, it's the same as, you know, going to a restaurant. You can have a wonderful restaurant and a wonderful meal, and it's absolutely awesome, the meal. But now the chef is willing to sit down with you, and while you're eating the meal, he can tell you about the effort he put into creating the meal and why he's doing it and so forth. And he can take joy in your joy. The ultimate reason for humanity, for creation, according to the Kabbalists, are that God wanted to live in the lower worlds. God has everything except finiteness. And so God wanted to live in the lower. It's the ultimate meaning of the purpose of life. And our purpose is to build a sanctuary for God. It's the magician. The magician doesn't act. I once read a TED talk by this magician talking about giving the act, and the magician can't see the magic. The magician can't feel the magic because the magician sees everything that's going on behind the scenes. What the magician can do is take pleasure in me watching his magic. And that's the relationship, that's the symbiotic relationship between God and mankind from a Kabbalistic perspective. And it's a wonderful idea. It's a wonderful idea that I could have this relationship in life. Life is a mystery to me to find what that is. And who is that asked that question?
That was me.
Oh, did that help to give you?
It's getting started. I know you got a lot more.
It's a lot, you know. It's a thick topic.
It's a really important topic.
At the end of the day, Our job is to tikkun olam, to repair the world. We come into this world, it is a laboratory of dysfunction, filled with good, filled with evil, we have the opportunity for inspiration, for striving to help. You know, the notion of good and evil is a challenging one in religion, and could you create that? But we also have to understand that without that, we would not have inspiration and striving and all the things that we have. It's a very challenging topic. And yet here we are. We have the opportunity. Look, this world needs a lot of good. Every one of us has an opportunity to do tremendous good in this world. And ultimately, it is that journey from being a selfish individual to a selfless. The return is to become selfless, to become one again. And we do that through bringing up, they call it in Kabbalah, to bring up the shattering of the vessel, bring the vessel back to its wholeness again.
Can I ask a question
Yes.
on that thought? Do you think that we have, by nature, a predisposition toward betterment?
For betterment. Yeah, so the Kabbalists talk about two warring souls, you know, the force of creation. So in Judaism, the forces of creation, Satan, it's kind of changed its meaning in Christianity to this opposing force. It's an opposing force in Judaism, but it's to pull us away from God. And so our consciousness is in the middle. It's the space between these two pulling us, and this is where our free will comes from. So it is there, but also is the side pulling us away, the side that wants to pull us. You know, we go further and further, and we become more and more estranged, which is why ultimately our happiness, our joy leaves us. The addiction of more and materiality ultimately loses its allure in us. So I don't know if that answers your question or not. It is in us.
Well, I guess I'm looking at it from an evolutionary standpoint. I mean,
I think it is in the design. I think it is in the evolutionary design.
So would it be too far to go to say the U-turn of happiness in both the economic and the Judeo-Christian context that you showed, is that the path of evolution?
I think evolution is the tool. The path is to separate from this conscious. I'm giving you from a spiritual perspective. The path is to separate, right? And then where we ultimately, humankind evolves to the point that humankind can accept the revelation that this is the pathway to return.
Would that require a common consciousness?
It would. You know, it's a tough thing in religion. Religion gets into trouble when they tell other people that are not of the religion what they need to do. There is a common element. Judaism tries to stay away from that. So sometimes it gets misunderstood, but Judaism is for Jews. That's because, and our purpose as a people is to be a light. We're not supposed to proselytize. Now, that said, within Judaism, there is the Noahide Laws, and it's a subset of what we have to do for our particular purpose. And it basically says that without these, you can't have a common humanity. You know, the murder and stealing and lying and a court of law and being kind to animals, or some basic 7 Noahide laws, that there's a basis by which all people have to do that and in order to be able to have a common, you know, this journey back. And everybody returns. I mean, this isn't like some people do. It's not like some people go, this notion of an eternal hell, it has never made sense to me. You know, as it's just a journey of separation and return. It's in essence the heartbeat of God, the heartbeat of the divine consciousness. You have a universe that explodes, and it comes into this wondrous thing that we call the universe and everything in there. And we go through this journey of separation and eventually return. And at some point, the universe will collapse or do something upon itself, and another universe, and it'll be another heartbeat of consciousness from a cosmic perspective.
That's a long time frame.
It's a very long time frame. But you know, in Kabbalistic thinking, in the Talmud, who is it? It is, I believe, the prophet Isaiah. 1,000 years is but a day in your life. a night's watch. 1,000. So 1,000 years. That's what the Talmud says to God. 1,000 years is but a day in your life. So think about what 1,000 years equates to a day. If you take 1,000 years and divide it by 24 hours, then your and my life, that seems like it goes on forever, is about like a 2-hour movie. From the God perspective, you and I are a 2-hour movie. Donald Trump is a 5-minute vignette in a 2-hour movie of each of our lives, basically.
So Scott, I want you to do something with Kabbalah. I want you to go back to the burning bush
Right.
and the definition of God as process and as trajectory and having direction. And then the story of where Kabbalah says it's coming together and what's going to happen.
So at the burning bush, it is many times mistranslated as the Hebrew is Iyeh Asher Iyeh, and it's sort of mistranslated as I am that I am. When Moses asked God, "What is your name?" Face to face, Moses is with God. He's reaching that prophetic. Moses is a prophet level. He's touching the writer face to face. The actual is I am becoming that I am becoming. That God is just a process, a continuous process of imagination, passing away eternity. You and I are that part of the imagination, this iteration of a humankind, of a universe, of a life that is passing away eternity. One little gradation of eternity. And that God is just a continuous, I'm becoming that I am becoming. Because quite frankly, if you're God, you can make up any rule you want and any story you want and any meaning you want. And like a writer, a fiction writer that's creating story, just create the story. And we, this process, there's parts of it like the story of Jacob's ladder. If you've ever heard, Jacob goes to sleep, has a dream, and he sees the ladder going up to heaven, and their souls going up and down, up and down, up and down. They're the actors going in and out of the play, of this cosmic play coming in. They're the souls coming from eternity. In the Talmud, in the mystical tradition, it says we actually chose the part that we're playing. We chose the part. We discuss it with the director before we even come into the play. This is the part. Yes, I chose this life and where I'm at and to live in Arden, Delaware. And we go through this part. And at the end of this, of going through this, of what we're going to go through, what our purpose is, we get touched on the lip. It creates the dimple. And we only remember just a wisp of it. But when we're in life and we're actually on the right path, we are, forget the writer who wrote Flow. We're in flow. We feel it. If you've been in that flow, you know you're in the right spot, in the right place, with the right people, and you are doing what you're supposed to be doing. And it is as though you remember something. You are totally engaged in that path. And so this relationship with life is like a tango. It is a dance that we have with our fate and our purpose, and we get to dance with it as we go through life. And we feel it. We feel when we're out of sync, and we feel when we're in sync. My path changed dramatically in 1983. I went to a whole different track. I said, no, you're not going to be a world traveler going around the world and doing that. This is the life you have. And then in 2006, it changed again. And I jumped another track, and I feel like I'm on the right path. I feel it. I feel so much more engaged in life.
Okay, I bet there's more questions because we have a few more minutes. Cecilia, I think, has had her hand up for a while. So if you would go ahead, Cecilia.
I had my virtual hand as well as my real hand, but I just want to thank you. You've opened yourself up, just given us a very, very intimate look at what's happened to you in your life, and not only emotionally, but I've been kind of fascinated to see the huge intellectual journey. It's really creative and really kind of astounding. So I wanted to thank you for doing
Thank
that,
you.
and for giving of yourself so much. And that's really quite a remarkable thing to do. And the other thing is I wanted to say is, after all the crap you went through, I'm really glad you're here, and I'm really glad you're alive, and that they didn't lobotomize you or something awful. And yeah, I'm really glad that you're not in your black hole.
They almost did electric shock,
been
and
there.
I don't know how good it was at that time in the
Yeah.
80s, but they didn't do electric shock to reset my brain. I feel fortunate. Thank you very much. I love Arden. I love my life. I love here with Michelle. I wake up and I look out across the cemeteries in front of the house, and it's just a wonderful place to be, and a wonderful situation to be in. I couldn't say that 10 years ago. No, 10 years ago I could. 15 years ago I couldn't say that. I couldn't say that. I still toyed with, why bother with life? What's the point of it? We're all going to be dead in the end. I didn't get it. I didn't get that, oh, there's this experience to be had. You know, it's interesting. I do the same things for different reasons now. What I did before, my work was to compensate for low self-esteem. My righteousness was performative righteousness, to be seen as okay, truth be told, I went down to New Orleans to pad my dating resume. Okay, to be seen as a sensitive person. Okay, that's what I was crying in the back. I was like, oh my God, I came down for such selfish reasons. I did good things for the wrong reasons. So now I'm aligning my philosophy with my practice. I still do the same kind of work. I do that striving, but not to compensate. It's a difference between seeking, being a seeker, and being an adventurer. I now look at it as, I'm okay with the failings of life. We are so flawed. I'm telling you, I won't say that Michelle's flawed. I'm flawed. We accept the flaws. I have to say, okay? She's less flawed than I am. You know, we accept the flaws that we have. I'm okay with the failings. I don't like to fail, but it's part of the experience of life to strive and to overcome adversity. That's what this has done for me. Can we get it elsewhere? I suppose. It's just, I got it here. I got it here.
As you're saying that, Scott, I'm thinking of the woman that you met in New Orleans who was in that place.
Yes, she was there. She was there.
Oh, yeah, Jerry Kunstler. Kunzelman.
I'm sorry, Jerry, you're on mute.
Scott, can I ask you a question? Can you?
I think, Jerry, were you saying something? Did you finish?
Well, I was just wondering, I guess I'm expecting that she didn't have the exposure to some of this logical framework, having this, and she just had it. I mean, it's there.
She had faith. She had tremendous faith. I
So
will
going
say
back
that.
to the religious aspect of it.
She was deeply ingrained. I was never deeply ingrained in spirituality. I was ingrained in religious ritual, but we never talked about God. We never talked about what it meant. We just did it. It was almost out of cultural obligation. And even having, my father is still around, we talk about it, he's 94, God bless him. You know, I claim he beat me for eating a cheeseburger in the house with his belt. He claims he beat me for other reasons. But he didn't really believe in God. He did it out of cultural obligation. That's what I grew up with. She had that spiritual connection. It's really the two. It's this, that's what Kabbalah means, to receive. It's a mental mindset that I choose to believe. It's a leap of faith. But the leap of faith is an incredibly powerful tool. I don't care whether it's business, secular, or religion. And I choose to have that dialogue and to have that experience. And it's a wonderful thing to reach that sort of level of mind. So.
I think we have Gina
And
has had her
Burley.
hand up for
Burley
a
had
while,
also
and
was-
Burley, and then Sean. So one of you guys go.
I'll ask a question. Scott, when you got off of the antidepressant and antipsychotic drugs, did you have a psychiatrist that helped you do that?
He was, he was steeped in pharmacology. He was secular from a religious perspective. I had a psychologist, Dan Gottlieb, who helped me from a professional perspective. And so I had, again, I had probably done it over the 25 years. I'd probably done it 15 times. And I had this sort of dark night of the soul. And it was, I did it cold turkey, but I had him sort of holding my hand from a professional perspective. I wasn't on any I hadn't been on lithium or anything of that ilk since 25 years ago. I was only on antidepressants and any anxiety.
Thanks.
So,
let's see, Gina, I think. Do you want to go? Gina, Carey?
Yes, I would like to. Thank you. Scott, I just want to tell you that I've enjoyed hearing your story so much, and I really want to thank you for sharing it with us.
thank you.
And I look out and I see so many people caught up in thought about how their experiences relate with yours. And I think that helps us all acknowledge or modify or whatever our own path. So thank you very, very much.
Oh, you're absolutely welcome.
How about Sean? Do you want to add or question?
Hi, Scott. I want to thank you for this evening and sharing. We would call that in church when I was growing up a testimony service. So I thank you very much.
I testified.
Testify, yes.
Yes, exactly.
I want to thank you for that. I'm so intrigued by the faith component of what you taught, also how faith is something that is used in very different forms throughout our life. And I just wanted to touch on that and ask if you could touch on that just a little bit more. I did enjoy
different chair.
There's a lot of, thank you very much. There's a lot of paradoxes. There's a paradox of good and evil with righteous people suffering. Faith is also a paradox. How does one get there when one needs to be there in order to get there? I have to thank my mentor and friend, Ernie Zook, and also, he also has COVID. I have to wish him well that he just got that. We're 5 years into it and he's banging his head and I'm trying to intellectualize, rationalize my way to spirituality. And he finally just got fed up and said to me, you can't get there from here. You can't get there from here. You can't intellectual. It's an empirical experience. It's an emotional experience. It's a different form of consciousness. It's an intuitive experience. It's not a rational experience. In Judaism, they call it ki'ilu, as if. You have to act as if. It's the fake it till you make it. Just do it, as Nike says. The other is that this faith component, na'aseh v'nishma, the Hebrew words, first we will do, and then we will understand. It's the basis of the dialogic also. I have to do, and then I understand. So this notion of the leap of faith, we must take the leap of faith. We must try it to buy it. It's the only way to do it. And so I did. I said, you know what? I'm just going to act as if God exists. And I learned another saying that God exists, but God doesn't exist for you unless you believe in God. So I had to believe. Now, is it a delusion? Is it confusion? Is it an illusion? Whatever you want to call, whatever SOION you want to put on there. I don't care if it's a delusion because I don't really know what reality is. I only know that my perception of reality is controlled and affected by my cognition of what I choose to believe. It's the ultimate free will. I don't get to determine how life happens. I get to determine my experience of life is totally on me. It's the ultimate in self-agency. It is the ultimate in self-agency, this leap of faith. I get to choose what life means to me. There's a saying in the Old Testament, behold, this day I give you a blessing and curse, life and death, good and evil, choose life that you and your children can live. Basically, the saying means that today I'm giving you an act. I'm giving you some event today. You choose what that means and choose the life side of what that means. Choose to make life out of that. So this is a world, it's a giant laboratory of life experience that we get to choose how to take on. That's been wonderful for me from a self-agency perspective. I hope that answers your question on faith. Yes, Hans.
Okay. I grew up in a Protestant environment with predestination, and I moved around free will over time. You brought up a lot of things that relate to Jewish practices or Judaism practices. How do they translate for other religions? Do the Presbyterians or the Methodists practice something along those same lines, or what do you know?
I've given a number of talks at Episcopalian, and they seem to love it and buy into it completely. I don't know, that is the Presbyterian a little more structured?
No.
Or is it less?
In principle, less.
So I think if in principle less, it should translate fine in terms of free will, that there is, Ernie, could I get you to speak a little bit if you're up for it? I don't know how you're feeling. I see you on here, but you're on mute.
Thanks,
He's my
Scott.
Yoda of comparative religion.
You hear me?
I can hear you. And so Ernie is Catholic, and he's been going to Hasidic classes with me for the last 9 years. And we've probably been to 20 or 30 together, I think. So Ernie, give me your perspective on the translation to
Well, from my perspective, it translates beautifully. But I have to say, as you know, Scott, I'm not necessarily traditional in all my beliefs, but I do see it's a matter of looking for it. I think the commonality is there, absolutely, and I think it comes directly from creation, but you have to look for it. The world is such that everything tends to be hidden from us. And I think you made this point. And if we look for, I think it's your fourth step up of the approach to the Bible of the hidden, and then you get to the hidden. And I think what you're talking about is that the differences in religions tend to mask the similarities. So you have to remove the masks to find the similarity. And I think in many ways, that's exactly what you've been saying.
So
I
Ernie,
find it fitting in all respects.
And we were talking about the story. I think the story is different, but as we work behind the story to the why and what it means, that similarity. It is ultimately we're on this journey. We're trying to understand the mystery, the pathway to get through the mystery. The Hebrew word for world, olam, also means hidden. It has the same meaning. The root is hidden for olam, and that's what this is. We're in a mystery exercise of sorts. And I think the redemptive path in Christianity is that pathway back also. There might be a heavier emphasis on, possibly, at least from my perspective, a heavier emphasis on the morality of that journey. But nonetheless, it's still that journey back from something, chaotic in creation back to the order of the oneness. I don't know, Hans, if that helps.
I think, if I could take the floor for a second, I think my takeaway from this was something you said early in the talk. When the student is ready, the teacher will appear. And maybe what we're all on a journey to do is to be that student that is ready to learn.
Pat, thank you for saying, I think it's a wonderful thing. I went from this need for objective truth to the subjectivity of it. And I'm more open to that learning coming from any number of directions. and that the learning is really, so Kabbalistically, you know, the eating of the apple in Eden, this metaphor of the eating of the apple and from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, was not that they didn't have knowledge, Adam and Eve, but that the knowledge was the knowledge in this world. And the knowledge, we're in the world of subjectivity. And we see it playing out awfully, terribly well, unfortunately, in America today, the subjectivity of knowledge and the subjectivity of this world and right and wrong. And so the eating of the apple was the mixing up, and we all were given that subjective view of the knowledge of this world. And part of that mystery is figuring out a common truth for us. And I think maybe it was you, Pat, who talked about the need for a common consciousness. We can only get that through dialogue and relationship. The one truth, and I again will thank Ernie for this, he's a lawyer, and I would come to him for advice, and of course he would give me 3 other reasons why I was wrong. And if I wanted my ego stroke, I had to come up with somebody else's reason, and he would fight my own reason, and I'd feel better about myself. But ultimately, the only truth we have is the truth that we agree on between us. And that happens through relationship. And I'm optimistic that the world is going through a churning. I mean, we have this unbelievable source of connectivity. Unfortunately, with you know, if you listen to the Social Dilemma movie or whatever, these recommendation engines, these echo chambers and such, we're diverging, we're not actually converging. And I think we have to get rid of listening to ourselves and only to people like ourselves and cross the aisle. And I think we could find some beautiful truths if we're willing to do that. So
I'd like to jump in. I'd like to jump in at the moment and just because it is 9 o'clock, and I have one request and see of you, Scott, and see if this is going to be possible. But there were a lot of rapid fire references and books and YouTubes and TED Talks, and some of which I recognize, some of which I didn't. But is there, do you have a document maybe that has some of the references that you used in your talk? I think that would be very helpful.
I will listen to this again and see which ones I referenced.
Okay.
This is where my scholarship falls short. I just have a list. It's a giant list. I mean, it's like but I will pick out what I talked about and reference all of the different characters. Absolutely, I can do that.
Great. That would be great if it's not too much trouble.
No, not at all. In fact, if this is a topic that we can only do so much in 50 minutes and a Q&A, it's a very rich topic. If there's interest in having a group that meets to want to talk about this in some way, I would be more than happy to do that on some regular basis if it's something that is of value to people. I would be very happy because it is a very rich topic that require every bullet that I showed. I'm on session 103 now with the One Synagogue. Every bullet is like a session, just one bullet of whatever it could be taught, and some we might go for sessions and sessions. So it's just a thought.
That would be great. We also, I think we should just, let people, it is after 9 o'clock. Is there any, I'd love to just say thank you to Scott, and this has been an amazing evening, and thank you very much. So I just want to make sure everybody that would Scott be interested in staying just a few more minutes to talk with people, but others, feel free to leave at this point.
I'm happy to stay. In the Hasidus, they call it a farbrengen, a joyous gathering. They go into the wee hours of the morning. They usually have liquor, I will say that much, because apparently it frees up the mind. And then they do these naguns, these wordless melodies in between and then they talk some more about a topic, then they drink a little bit more. I once finished a bottle of Uza with a rabbi. It was 4 a.m. I'm just saying, not that we're doing that, but I'm happy to talk more for anyone that would.
Well, I would like to thank everybody for coming, and please do contact us. You can always email scholarsguild@gmail.com for more information to find out if we're actually moving forward with more sessions with Scott. And also we are on Facebook you can always contact us through that, and there will be notifications to you all if you're on the email list. So thank you, everybody, and stay tuned if you would like to continue talking with Scott.
Thank you, Scott.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Are you going to stay on?
I'm happy to if people, it's up to you guys, whoever.
I'm up for another session another time, but I'm going to go. Bye.
Okay.
I would agree with that. Let's do another part 2.
Yeah.
We could
Okay.
do that. We could, you know, I know everybody's probably maybe a little tired and about other things to do potentially, but feel free to just jump in if you have another couple questions. I don't want to cut it
And
short.
that'll also give us a chance to look at some of the material Scott's going to share.
Yeah, I just want to tell you, having spent some time with Scott, he's got a long way to go. There's a lot of really cool stuff to talk about. It probably is not so much a Q&A right now as a different session with a different focus, I thought.
Yeah, I would agree with you.
Would be
So
happy
Scott,
to do that.
if we went forward with another session, maybe you could come up with a like, it was a very, very broad overview, I have a feeling, of your experiences and your thought processes and your journeys. So maybe we could come up with something that is more focused for a follow-on, something that, you know, people, so we have a more of a focus for a discussion.
Sure. And maybe there's some questions that people want to, if they want to ask, that we could form what we talk about around, if there's particular topics that interest people.
Hey, Scott, one thought would be, from what I got from you, is your true story of the history of Kabbalah and what's in it and what is hidden in it and where it's going.
I can certainly talk about Kabbalah, at least what I know of it, you know, history and meaning. Yeah, it's really quite a remarkable psychological concept, I think.
Yeah.
Kabbalah.
I'd like to suggest a session that would be an intersection between the science and the theology, or the faith, or the spirituality. And I would like to see a co-host between Mr. Schwaber and yourself.
That would also be a very interesting one. There is an MIT a professor, PhD, Gerald Schroeder, wrote a number of books, Genesis and the Big Bang, and he finds modern science is quite consistent with the Old Testament and creation from his perspective, and does a nice job of that. If that's where you're leaning.
I am leaning that way because I know Jim very well, and we've had talks, and I know his. I'm speaking a little bit for you, Jim, but when you begin to talk about the nature of consciousness, you begin to escape the realm of known science into something else. And I think that something else would be something interesting to explore.
I think the science of consciousness, and I did read that one paper by Jim, but I think to do something, Jim, with you on the science of consciousness and its intersection with spirituality, I think would be really quite interesting.
Yeah. You know, the three-way conversation we had with Schweers was pretty cool too. I don't know if you bring something to the party.
I don't remember the specific of what we did on that. I know we talked somewhat on the science, but I forget what the specific was of that one. But yes, we can do that too.
We tied it very closely to Kabbalah and the idea of reality as process and consciousness as the ground truth.
So yes, so we can do a little bit. We can do a little bit on that, and maybe you and I can scheme a little bit on that. We could do Kabbalah and coffee. That's a Sunday morning kind of thing.
That's great.
I think it'd be a great follow-up to this.
Hey, Scott, I got for a birthday present from my daughter and son-in-law, we got a magnificent espresso machine. It's unbelievable.
There you go.
Have some coffee with me. I got the vaccine, so pretty soon you can't make me sick, and come on over.
Okay, well then we'll do Kabbalah and coffee.
What about us?
Are you a 1B? Are you a 1B?
No, I don't think so.
Our provider.
So I think Fred Hartman and Gail, did you guys want to ask your question? It's in the chat. So or should I do
beyond
it?
our tribes. Is that the question? Beyond, how do we move beyond our tribe?
Do you have any thoughts on how we can move beyond our tribe?
Yeah,
to a shared, caring humanity.
I do, and I'm quite, Kabbalistically, each day of creation maps out to 1,000 years, Kabbalistically, roughly 1,000 years, and this journey to so the sabbatical millennium would be in this year 6,000 to 7,000. So the Jewish calendar is at 5782, I believe. We're close. You could see a lot of stuff happening. This explosion of information, explosion of connectivity. Time magazine had 2050 as a singularity for growth in human life, like a biblical proportions kind of growth. Computers, designing computers, robotics. We no longer have to work by the sweat of our brow, abundance. I think humanity is moving to that point. That said, I think we're so caught up, and Jonathan Haidt, he wrote the Coddling of the American Mind, and he writes a lot as a moral psychologist. You should listen to some of his talks, certainly about the left and the right, and the psychology of why the left and the right cannot get along, just by character trait, and what makes us go to be more conservative or liberal. We place a lot of objective truth on our subjectivity, I think. And I think we have to be really careful about that. So Judaism is it's a bounded, and I think Christianity has my take is a different purpose. I think of spreading the word, of spreading this revelation out. One of the things that Judaism has as a bounded side, there is this love thy neighbor as thyself as a affirmation, but there is also that which is hurtful to you, do not do to another. And nobody likes being told what to do. We all don't like that, yet we're very outward in our social activism has become hyper out. It's all about who's doing wrong, as opposed to what more can I do. And I think part of this is to get in balance again in making the world a better place and not telling others how to be better. That's my take on the tribalism that we have, and we have to move beyond that. I think the world will get there. I think we will reach that stage because we are moving into a state of abundance. We still have people in my lifetime, your lifetime. I mean, half the world was in poverty. It's now 1 billion. It's still a lot of people, but it's 6 billion are out of poverty, 1 billion still to go. We're moving rapidly. There's another professor, he just passed away, the equivalent of Health and Human Services from Sweden, Hans Rosling, that talks about how the world is getting better on a scale of about 100 years minimum, because we get so caught up in what's happening year by year, even decade by decade. But by every measure, objective measure, in 100 years, education mortality, child mortality, income inequality around the world, including income inequality that we talk so much about, the world has gotten dramatically better. And his charts are on, he has TED Talks also, his charts are up there. If you look best stats on the internet, Hans Rosling. What is interesting is the more liberal the person is, what he discovered in his studies, the more liberal the person is, the worse they see the world. The more liberal countries like Sweden, the Nordic countries, very egalitarian, are the most wrong on the objective truth facts about whether the world is getting better or not. It's a fascinating talk. He has 2 on that and the psychology of why that is. I believe it's getting better, but I also believe that we're part of that story. We have to get it better. So the whole thing with Black Lives Matter is like, what do we do? Is there systemic racism? How much of it is of? I decided, my thing on that was to go mentor in Camden, and because politically I believe in self-agency, I wanted to teach them self-agency, that regardless of circumstance, that they could rise, they could reach those lowest ladders. And I give them, in my case, I'm giving talks on 40 years in tech, and I've now done 6 of those, and I'll keep doing those. I think we just have to do our part. And there's wonderful people in Arden that are doing that, whether it's homeless or whatever. And I don't know if that answered, I probably rambled. I don't know, Fred, if that answered your question or not. I think it's a blip. I think the tribalism is a reaction to too much telling others what to do. And I think it's a reaction to, now we're getting into politics, I suppose. We have an invasive environment where we tell people what to do and what to spend their money on and things like that. And I think my natural tendency is more libertarian in that we should do that we need social service and things like that, but we have to be careful when we push it too far. And I think the Trump situation and things like that are, and even what's happening in Europe and whatever, I'm way out of the thing of this talk, but my own is that it's a symptom of a trend that must get back in balance. The desire for freedom and doing and so forth. And I don't have answers for all of that, but other than my optimism and doing my own part in that. Did I step into an area I probably shouldn't?
No. So Marty Coates is asking a question. Marty, you want to ask yourself, or I see it in the chat there. You'd have to unmute, but it says, I'll just read it. Go ahead, Marty.
Well, I'm not Marty. I'm Don.
No, you're not.
Her
I'm
husband.
sorry. Your Zoom says Marty Coates. So
that's correct. Yes, she was here.
Oh, okay.
No, James asked the question earlier whether, I think he may have implied whether there's a genetic tendency in the human momentum to do better, and that it's a delicate balance of good and bad, if we can be dualistic in that way.
There are, I forget the talks that I listened to, and Hans Rosling started me on it, but there were others that talked, I forget the Harvard professor talks about the history of violence and things. Yeah. And I forget his name.
Scott. Hey, Scott, I think you're thinking of Steven Pinker.
Steven Pinker, yes. The world is so much better than it used to be. And I don't know if he talks from a genetics perspective or not. James, maybe you would know, because I don't know the science side of it, other than that the world is, geez, so I think, would any of us want to live 1,000 years ago? Would any of us want to live 200 years ago? I mean, it was just, the existence was, it was hand to mouth. It was brutal existence. Most people were, dirt poor. We live in a time when we have more in a Wawa around the corner than some kings and queens had 1,000 years ago. I mean, I just wouldn't want to live in any other time than where we're at, and violence and other things. So I think he makes the case, and I don't remember the genetics aspect of it, Marty, that but I don't know that I don't think it's that lower consciousness. I don't think I think it's happening at is that the prefrontal cortex side of us? I mean, there's an executive that I think probably speaks to us more, and I'm getting into Jim's field, and I'm just going to stop completely. But isn't that the late stage growth, this higher consciousness part of our brain, as I understand it, Jim?
Yeah, supposedly it doesn't really swing in fully until your mid-20s.
But even within evolution, though, isn't this a relatively late stage evolution?
Yeah, very. It's the frontal cortex, the growth of the frontal cortex past being a motor structure, to add in all these other decision-making things as something that's in primates and in cetaceans and elephants, but not too much else.
I mean, if someone was designing something so that the genetics would follow a course of returning to a commonality and to a less violent world and controlling these urges, it seems like the evolution certainly is following that path. Notwithstanding that we have Hitlers and Stalins and characters that come into play and Saddam Hussein's and whatever that twist the world completely upside down for periods of time.
Maybe we learn something from that too, I hope.
I think it's part of that journey. You know, we learn new ways of mastering nature. And unfortunately, the first thing we seem to do is master, you know, greed and consumption and other things. And then eventually we get a handle on those new ways. Fred, and I choose to believe that the ship is, you know, even the coronavirus, you know, as strange as this existence has been, the whole world seems to have had a calling to at least in some ways rethink culturally what it means to be human, consumption, materiality, things like that. I mean, I would hope that people are thinking differently about that. And as it seems to be, as we would never wish upon ourselves to have this in the people that are contracting it and dying, there is on a humanity level, there I believe will be a good that comes out of this, and we will rise to another level. And the ship is, you know, steering the ship towards a better way for us to get to. We're in a weird way, there are countries that are doing things together that they never would have before. So that's my philosophical view of it, I guess.
It is a humbling.
It's an incredibly humbling experience. And yet it's steering us down a path in some way. And I would hope it's a better path.
You know, just to say, 100 years ago, infectious disease was the primary killer side of infections. Things that vaccines can prevent now.
I thank God that we are producing a vaccine within a year. And if it was, what was polio, 20 years or something, or a Spanish, well, I don't even know, did they ever get a vaccine for the Spanish flu?
So, but you know, this the ability to produce RNA virus vaccines is a miracle. It's just wonderful.
We're entering a new age of information and medicine, and it's
Well, it's a greater understanding of, you know, nature.
We're figuring nature out. We're getting close to figuring the mystery. If it is a puzzle on a cosmic scale, we're rapidly unraveling it.
The idea of RNA vaccines has been around for decades. The ability to produce RNA in quantity and to keep it from degrading, to keep it stable, is what's new. But in principle, do you know how this works? So messenger RNA is what's transcribed from the genes, from the DNA. And so, what we've got here is we're making the RNA that the virus DNA codes for. So we're not introducing the virus, dead virus, partially killed virus, anything but the virus, just the RNA. And what that does is it gets taken up by cells right away, and immediately the machinery of the cell cranks the protein that RNA codes for, which in this case is designed to be the spike proteins for the virus. They stick into the cell wall and trigger the immune system to go crazy and kill the cell and build up antibodies against the spike protein. So if and when you see a real virus and a spike protein shows up, the immune system is loaded for bear. It's brilliant. There's no risk to it. You're not introducing any of the viral DNA or anything that potentially could infect you. You're just putting in the machinery to make something that triggers the immune system to kill the virus. It's beautiful.
I'm hoping that so much good will come out of the pain and the price, you know, that we From a spiritual perspective, it's hard. This is one of the topics is always the good and evil, the theodicy, I guess, and God introducing evil. And if it is a God-driven world, introducing death and all this that's going on, and yet it is a part of this. That could be a topic in its own right, is how do you deal with that?
It definitely could be, because, you would have to accept the notion of a certain degree of malevolence to God to introduce challenges. I mean, why would he do that? Why would God say, let's see what you do with this?
Why is there suffering, right? And you could say that with just even a small child, right? That, bring someone into the world that is, say, has a disease, that is, and that is, it's a worthy topic, I will say. We couldn't do justice to it, because there's a lot. We have to look at the overall framework. I can only tell you at the end of it, because we're inside the world, we're inside the system. So we can't see any other context other than characters living out inside the system. At the end of the book of Job, where they talk about this, and Job is this person that receives a lot of evil, ultimately a righteous person, and he finally rails against God, and at the end, God says, where were you at the beginning of time in making this? How could you possibly understand? How could you possibly see what I see in this? And we can't. We can only see the suffering and feel it and live through it and overcome it, and the striving and the growth that comes, and overcoming it. That's all we can. And I suspect we won't ultimately get to that answer until we cross over to the other side, if there is another side. If there isn't, it doesn't matter anyway, I suppose. And if there is, there'll be some, one rabbi explained to me, we're trying to understand the tapestry from the underside, and all we see is the tangled threads and so forth, and we can't see the beauty of the humanity from the other side of the tapestry that we have gone through. And that's the side of humanity that strives and overcome. Dan Gottlieb did go through a lot of suffering, and I learned a lot from him, and yet even he himself would say, well, he wouldn't wish upon himself. He became a paraplegic in a car accident in his late 20s, I think. The Dan Gottlieb that I used in from Voices in the Family. And yet he would say it changed him as a human, that he would never have reached the level, and I don't mean the level of fame, but I mean the level of humanity. On his business card, he just says human. He calls himself a human. And that's how he looks at himself, that he became a human through that process, because he could appreciate that. His level of empathy was a level that he could not get to in any other way. It doesn't justify, I suppose, we can't see any justification for that, let's say, and yet there is something that came out of it that he sees.
Yeah.
I by the way, I previously, like half an hour ago, repeatedly tried to raise hand, unmute, was totally unsuccessful, and that's why I've been doing this damn chat stuff. Thank you. This has been wonderful.
Oh, thank you, Fred.
And like, we evolved from being whatever we were to, on an individual level, spiritual, to on a larger level, having teachings and learnings and stuff. And like I said earlier, my sadness is that the basic humanity should all be the same. But we find some relatively small percentage that are total a-holes and mess the whole thing up for everybody. And I mean, that's what horrifies and saddens me. And that's why I'd rather go for a walk in the woods.
It's a strange thing, and yes, I'm in agreement with you, and it seems that way. And yet nature does this too. It's not just humans, more people have suffered and died from nature being nature than all the wars of humanity.
I totally agree with you.
Right?
The possibilities, the fundamental stuff in life, whether it's food or life expectations, or you name it, have been good. But the disparities.
There is, I think the difference is, and this is where humanity comes in, that we are unique in this creation. We are God